Sarah Jenkins, the chief of police in a small South Carolina town, was known for her no-nonsense approach to law enforcement. On a warm Tuesday afternoon, she was patrolling the streets in her police cruiser, her eyes scanning the sidewalks for any signs of trouble. As she turned onto Oak Street, a flash of color caught her attention. There, on the corner, stood Aaliyah Thompson, a young black woman in her early 20s. Aaliyah had set up a small table covered with an array of vibrant, handmade bracelets. Her enthusiasm was evident as she called out to passers-by, encouraging them to stop and take a look at her creations. Sarah slowed her cruiser, observing the scene. She noticed a small crowd gathering around Aaliyah's table, some people trying on bracelets while others engaged in animated conversations with the young entrepreneur. The atmosphere was lively and positive, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. After a few minutes of observation, Sarah decided to intervene. She parked her cruiser and approached Aaliyah's table. The crowd parted as they noticed the police chief's presence, and a hush fell over the group. "Excuse me, miss," Sarah said, her voice firm and authoritative. "Do you have a permit for this street vending?" Aaliyah's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "Officer, I'm just selling some handmade bracelets. I didn't know I needed a permit for that." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You're obstructing the sidewalk and causing a disturbance. I'm going to have to ask you to pack up and move along." Aaliyah's expression changed from surprise to indignation. "A disturbance? I'm just trying to start a small business. How is that a disturbance?" Sarah stood her ground, unmoved by Aaliyah's protests. "Ma'am, if you don't have a proper permit, this activity is illegal. I'm going to have to take you down to the station." The crowd began to murmur, some people expressing disbelief at the turn of events. Aaliyah tried to explain her situation further, but Sarah cut her off, already reaching for her handcuffs. "Please turn around and put your hands behind your back," Sarah instructed, her voice leaving no room for argument. Aaliyah complied, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. As Sarah cuffed her and led her to the police cruiser, whispers and disapproving looks followed them. Aaliyah's table of bracelets was left unattended, a colorful reminder of the abruptly halted entrepreneurial spirit. The ride to the police station was tense and silent. Aaliyah sat in the back, her mind racing with thoughts of injustice and frustration. Sarah, for her part, kept her eyes on the road, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that she might have overreacted. At the station, Sarah led Aaliyah to a holding cell. As she closed the cell door, Aaliyah finally broke her silence. "This isn't right," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I wasn't hurting anyone. I was just trying to make a living." Sarah paused, her hand still on the cell door. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across her face, but she quickly composed herself, reverting to her professional demeanor. "You'll have a chance to explain yourself during processing," Sarah said, her voice devoid of emotion. "For now, you'll stay here until we sort this out." As Sarah walked away, she couldn't shake the image of Aaliyah's face, a mix of anger and disappointment. The young woman's words echoed in her mind, challenging her notion of what it meant to serve and protect. Sarah retreated to her office, closing the door behind her. She sat at her desk, staring at the incident report she needed to fill out. The pen in her hand felt heavier than usual. As she began to write, she found herself questioning her decision. Was this really about maintaining order, or was there something else at play? The bustling sounds of the police station faded into the background as Sarah grappled with her thoughts. She had always prided herself on being fair and just, but now she wondered if her actions had truly served the community she had sworn to protect. As the day wore on, news of Aaliyah's arrest spread through the small town like wildfire. Sarah's phone began to ring incessantly, with concerned citizens and local officials demanding explanations. The simple act of arresting a young entrepreneur had somehow ballooned into a community-wide issue, and Sarah found herself at the center of a storm she hadn't anticipated. The news of Aaliyah Thompson's arrest spread rapidly through the small South Carolina town. igniting a firestorm of reactions. Within hours, social media was abuzz with conflicting accounts of the incident, and local gossip networks worked overtime. In a modest home on the outskirts of town, Aaliyah's mother, Denise Thompson, paced anxiously in the living room. Her phone had been ringing non-stop since she'd received the shocking news of her daughter's arrest. Denise's mind raced, trying to piece together what could have led to this situation. "I just don't understand," Denise muttered to herself, her voice thick with worry. "Aaliyah's never been in trouble before. She was just selling those bracelets she makes." As Denise grappled with her confusion and fear, she decided to take action. She grabbed her car keys, determined to get answers directly from the police station. Meanwhile, at the station, Sarah Jenkins found herself summoned to an emergency meeting with her superiors. The conference room was tense as she entered, greeted by the stern faces of the mayor and the police commissioner. "Chief Jenkins," the mayor began, his voice grave, "we've got a situation on our hands. The arrest of that young woman is causing quite a stir in the community." Sarah straightened her uniform, feeling a mix of defensiveness and unease. "Sir, I was simply enforcing the law. She didn't have a permit for street vending." The police commissioner leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "We understand that, Sarah. But we need to consider the optics of this situation. People are already crying racism and police overreach." Sarah felt a twinge of irritation at the implication. "With all due respect, sir, this has nothing to do with race. It's about maintaining order and following proper procedures." The mayor sighed, rubbing his temples. "Regardless of the reasons, we need to handle this carefully. The last thing we need is for this to escalate into a larger controversy." As the meeting continued, the pressure on Sarah intensified. Her superiors stressed the importance of maintaining discipline within the force, while also preserving community relations. Sarah left the meeting feeling conflicted, caught between her duty to uphold the law and the growing realization that her actions might have far-reaching consequences. Across town, Aaliyah had been released and was now sitting in her family's living room, recounting the day's events to her father, Marcus Thompson. Marcus, a veteran civil rights activist, listened intently, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "I just don't get it, Dad," Aaliyah said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was just trying to sell my bracelets. How did it turn into this?" Marcus leaned forward, placing a comforting hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Aaliyah, what happened to you today is a stark reminder that the fight for equality is far from over. But you can't let this defeat you." Aaliyah looked up at her father, drawing strength from his unwavering gaze. "What should I do? I feel so powerless." Marcus stood up, pacing the room as he often did when formulating a plan. "You're far from powerless, sweetheart. This is an opportunity to stand up, to make your voice heard. Your entrepreneurial spirit is exactly what this community needs." As Marcus spoke, Aaliyah felt a spark of determination ignite within her. Her father's words resonated, reminding her of the stories he'd told about his own battles against injustice. "You're right, Dad," Aaliyah said, her voice growing stronger. "I can't let this stop me. But how do we fight this?" Marcus smiled, a glint of pride in his eyes. "We start by telling your story. We reach out to the community, we organize, and we demand change. This isn't just about you anymore, Aaliyah. It's about every young person who's ever been unfairly targeted or discouraged from pursuing their dreams." As father and daughter began to formulate their plan, the atmosphere in the Thompson household shifted from one of despair to one of purpose. Aaliyah's arrest, while unjust, had ignited a fire that would soon spread throughout the community. Outside, the sun was setting on a day that had begun like any other, but had transformed into a catalyst for change. The small town, once seemingly peaceful and orderly, now stood on the brink of a conflict that would challenge its very foundations, and at the center of it all were two women, Sarah Jenkins and Aaliyah Thompson, whose lives had become intertwined in ways neither could have anticipated. The following day, Sarah Jenkins found herself parked outside the Thompson residence. She sat in her cruiser, hands gripping the steering wheel, debating whether this unscheduled visit was a wise decision. After a deep breath, she stepped out and approached the front door. Marcus Thompson answered, his imposing figure filling the doorway. His eyes narrowed as he recognized the police chief. "Chief Jenkins," he said, his tone neutral but guarded. "What brings you to our home?" Sarah straightened her posture, maintaining her professional demeanor. "Mr. Thompson, I'm here to speak with Aaliyah about yesterday's incident. I believe there may have been some misunderstandings." Marcus raised an eyebrow, a hint of challenge in his voice. "Misunderstandings? Is that what we're calling it now?" He stepped aside, allowing Sarah to enter. The living room was modest but warm, filled with family photos and well-worn furniture. Aaliyah sat on the couch, her posture tense as she watched Sarah enter. "Aaliyah," Sarah began, "I wanted to discuss—" Marcus interrupted, his voice firm. "Before you say anything, Chief Jenkins, I think it's important we have a frank discussion about justice and order in this town." Sarah felt her defenses rising but forced herself to remain calm. "Mr. Thompson, I assure you, my actions were based solely on upholding the law." Marcus let out a dry chuckle. "The law? Let me tell you about the law, Chief Jenkins. I've spent my entire life watching how the law gets applied differently depending on who you are and what you look like." He moved to a bookshelf, pulling out a photo album. "Let me show you something." For the next hour, Marcus shared stories from his days as a civil rights activist. He showed Sarah photos of sit-ins, marches, and confrontations with law enforcement. His voice, initially sharp with anger, softened as he recounted tales of both brutality and triumph. "You see, Chief," Marcus said, closing the album, "what happened to Aaliyah yesterday isn't new. It's part of a long history of over-policing and discouraging black entrepreneurship." Sarah listened, her discomfort growing with each story. She had always prided herself on being fair, on not seeing color, but Marcus's words were forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths. I never intended to discourage anyone," Sarah said, her voice less certain than before. "I was just following protocol." Aaliyah, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "But that's the problem, isn't it? The protocol itself might be the issue." Sarah turned to Aaliyah, seeing not the troublemaker she had arrested, but a young woman with dreams and determination. "I understand you were just trying to sell your bracelets. Can you tell me more about your business?" As Aaliyah began to share her aspirations, her eyes lit up with passion. She talked about her designs, her plans to expand, and her hope to inspire other young entrepreneurs in the community. Sarah found herself nodding, a realization dawning. "I never considered. I didn't think about the impact this could have on your future." Marcus watched the exchange, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "That's often the problem, Chief Jenkins. It's not always about intentional harm. Sometimes it's about not seeing the full picture." As the conversation continued, Sarah felt her perspective shifting. The certainty she had felt about her actions began to crumble, replaced by a growing awareness of the complexities she had overlooked. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "I may have made a mistake yesterday. I was so focused on enforcing the letter of the law that I didn't consider its spirit." Aaliyah and Marcus exchanged glances, surprised by the admission. "What does that mean for me?" Aaliyah asked cautiously. "For my business?" Sarah took a deep breath. "It means I owe you an apology, Aaliyah, and it means I need to reevaluate how we approach situations like this in the future." As Sarah prepared to leave, Marcus stopped her at the door. "Chief Jenkins, recognizing a mistake is the first step. But what matters now is what you do next." Sarah nodded, her mind already racing with the implications of this conversation. "You've given me a lot to think about, Mr. Thompson. I assure you, this isn't the end of the discussion." As she walked back to her cruiser, Sarah felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, only to be replaced by a new, heavier responsibility. The certainty she had felt about her role in the community had been shaken, and she knew that the coming days would require serious reflection and potentially difficult decisions. Driving away from the Thompson house, Sarah realized that her visit had not only changed her perspective on Alia's case, but had also opened her eyes to broader issues within her department and the community she served. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose in her role as chief of police. In the days following Sarah's visit to the Thompson household, Alia found herself at the center of a growing movement. Inspired by her father's encouragement and fueled by her own sense of injustice, she decided to take action. With the help of her friends and social media, Alia began organizing a peaceful demonstration to protest against the criminalization of young entrepreneurs. The planning started small, with Alia and a handful of friends meeting at a local coffee shop. They discussed their experiences with law enforcement and the challenges of starting businesses in their community. As word spread, more young people joined their cause, each bringing their own stories and ideas. "We're not just protesting my arrest," Alia explained to the growing group. "We're fighting for the right to pursue our dreams without fear of being shut down or arrested." The group decided to hold a rally in the town square, complete with speeches, music, and a showcase of local young entrepreneurs. They created flyers, set up social media pages, and reached out to local media outlets. The response was overwhelming, with supporters from all corners of the community offering help and resources. Meanwhile, Sarah Jenkins observed the preparations for the demonstration with a mix of concern and curiosity. From her office window, she could see young people putting up posters and handing out flyers. The energy in the town was palpable, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a twinge of admiration for Alia's determination. "Chief," one of her officers said, entering her office, "what are we going to do about this protest? Should we increase patrols?" Sarah paused, considering her response carefully. "No increased patrols," she said finally. "We'll maintain our usual presence, but I want everyone briefed on proper crowd management techniques. This is a peaceful demonstration, and we're going to respect their right to assemble." The officer nodded, looking slightly surprised at Sarah's measured response. As he left, Sarah turned back to the window, her mind racing with thoughts of the changes happening in her town. The day of the demonstration arrived, and the town square was buzzing with activity. Alia stood at the center, surrounded by a diverse group of young entrepreneurs showcasing their products and services. The crowd grew steadily, with people of all ages coming to show their support. Local news crews arrived, their cameras capturing the scene. Alia, dressed in a bright yellow blazer adorned with one of her handmade bracelets, stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice strong and clear. "We're here today because we believe in the power of entrepreneurship and the right to pursue our dreams without fear." As Alia spoke, her words resonating with the crowd, Sarah arrived at the edge of the square. She stood quietly, listening to the young woman's impassioned speech. "We're not asking for handouts," Alia continued. "We're asking for a fair chance. We're asking for support instead of suspicion, guidance instead of punishment." The crowd cheered, and Sarah found herself nodding along. She watched as other young people took the stage, sharing their own stories of struggle and aspiration. The diversity of ideas and businesses represented was impressive, from tech startups to artisanal crafts. As the rally continued, Sarah noticed something she hadn't expected. The positive energy was infectious. Community members were engaging with the young entrepreneurs, offering advice, making purchases, and forming connections. What had started as a protest was transforming into a celebration of local talent and innovation. Reporters began approaching Sarah for comment. She took a deep breath, knowing her words would be scrutinized. "The police department's role is to serve and protect our community," she said carefully. "Today has shown me that part of that duty involves supporting our young people's aspirations. We need to find a balance between maintaining order and fostering growth." Her statement, broadcast on local news, sparked a flurry of discussions both within the police department and the wider community. Some praised her openness to change, while others criticized what they saw as a softening stance on law enforcement. As the day wound down, Aaliyah approached Sarah, her expression a mix of wariness and hope. "Chief Jenkins," she said, "I didn't expect to see you here." Sarah met her gaze steadily. "I felt it was important to be here, to listen and understand. You've certainly made an impact, Aaliyah." Aaliyah nodded, a small smile forming. "This is just the beginning. We're not going to stop until we see real change." As they parted ways, both women felt the weight of the day's events. Aaliyah had emerged as a charismatic leader, giving voice to a generation's hopes and frustrations. Sarah, for her part, found herself at a crossroads, realizing that the path forward would require a fundamental shift in how she approached her role as chief of police. The demonstration had awakened something in the community, a spark of change that would continue to grow in the days and weeks to come. As the sun set on the town square, the air was filled with a sense of possibility and the promise of a new chapter in the town's history. In the wake of the successful demonstration, Sarah Jenkins found herself grappling with an intense internal conflict. The energy and passion she had witnessed at the rally continued to resonate with her, challenging her long-held beliefs about law enforcement and community relations. One morning, as Sarah sat in her office reviewing reports, her phone rang. It was the mayor, his voice tense and urgent. "Chief Jenkins, we need to talk about this situation with Aaliyah Thompson and these young entrepreneurs," he said without preamble. "Things are getting out of hand. I need you to shut this down before it escalates further." Sarah felt a knot forming in her stomach. "Sir, with all due respect, I'm not sure that's the right approach. The demonstration was peaceful, and they raised some valid points about—" The mayor cut her off. "I don't care about their points, Sarah. I care about maintaining order in this town. Your job is to enforce the law, not to support every kid with a business idea. I want these unlicensed vendors off our streets. Understood?" As the call ended, Sarah leaned back in her chair, a heavy sigh escaping her lips. The mayor's orders felt wrong, yet she knew the consequences of defying them could be severe. Her career, which she had built over decades of dedicated service, hung in the balance. Later that day, Sarah confided in her longtime colleague and friend, Detective Mark Rodriguez. They sat in a quiet corner of the local diner, away from prying ears. "I don't know what to do, Mark," Sarah admitted, stirring her coffee absently. "Part of me wants to support Aaliyah and these young people. They're not causing any harm and their energy could really benefit our community. But if I go against the mayor's orders—" Mark nodded sympathetically. "It's a tough spot, Chief, but you've always told us to do what's right even when it's hard. Maybe it's time to take your own advice." Sarah smiled wryly. "Easier said than done when your job's on the line." As they continued their discussion, Sarah's phone buzzed with a news alert. She opened it to find Aaliyah giving an interview to a local reporter. The young woman spoke eloquently about her vision for a more inclusive and supportive community, one that nurtured its young entrepreneurs rather than stifling them. Watching the interview, Sarah felt a mix of admiration and concern. Aaliyah was quickly becoming a powerful voice in the community, and her message was resonating with many. But as her influence grew, so did the pressure on Sarah to take action against the unlicensed vendors. That evening, as Sarah drove home, she took a detour through the town center. She saw several young people selling their wares on the street corners: artisanal soaps, hand-painted postcards, homemade jewelry. The scene was lively and positive, with locals and tourists alike engaging with the young entrepreneurs. Sarah parked her car and walked among the vendors, observing their interactions. She overheard conversations about business plans, marketing strategies, and dreams for the future. It struck her that these young people weren't just selling products. They were building skills, confidence, and community connections. As she reached the end of the block, Sarah found herself face to face with Aaliyah. who was helping a young boy set up his lemonade stand. "Chief Jenkins," Aaliyah said, her tone cautious but not hostile. "I didn't expect to see you here." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of her uniform more than ever. "I wanted to see for myself what's happening here. Aaliyah, I need you to understand the position I'm in. There are laws and regulations that I'm bound to uphold." Aaliyah straightened, meeting Sarah's gaze directly. "And we need you to understand our position, Chief. These laws are stifling our community's growth and potential. We're not asking to break the law. We're asking for the law to be reevaluated." As they talked, Sarah found herself increasingly torn. The passion and determination in Aaliyah's eyes reminded her of why she had become a police officer in the first place, to serve and protect her community. But now, it seemed, the very laws she had sworn to uphold were at odds with the community's needs. Driving home that night, Sarah's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. She knew that the coming days would require her to make a difficult decision, one that would not only impact her career but potentially change the course of her town's future. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah made a resolution. She would spend the next day researching other communities that had successfully integrated young entrepreneurs into their local economies. Perhaps there was a middle ground, a way to support these young people while still maintaining order and safety. Sarah entered her home, feeling both the weight of her responsibility and a glimmer of hope. She knew that the path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, she felt truly alive in her role as chief of police. Whatever decision she made, it would be with the best interests of her entire community at heart. The next morning, Sarah woke up early, her mind still churning with thoughts from the previous day. She had spent half the night researching other communities' approaches to young entrepreneurs, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Before heading to the station, she made a decision. She would visit Aaliyah again, this time with an open mind and a willingness to listen. Sarah arrived at the Thompson residence just as the sun was peeking over the horizon. She took a deep breath before knocking on the door. To her surprise, it was Aaliyah who answered, already dressed and ready for the day. "Chief Jenkins," Aaliyah said, her eyebrows raised in surprise. "What brings you here so early?" Sarah straightened her shoulders. "Aaliyah, I was hoping we could talk, really talk, about your goals and aspirations. I want to understand better what you and the other young entrepreneurs are trying to achieve." Aaliyah studied Sarah's face for a moment, then nodded and stepped aside to let her in. They settled in the living room, the early morning light casting a soft glow through the windows. "So," Aaliyah began, "what do you want to know?" For the next hour, Sarah listened intently as Aaliyah shared her dreams. The young woman spoke passionately about creating opportunities for her peers, about revitalizing the local economy, and about bridging the gap between law enforcement and the community. "It's not just about selling bracelets or lemonade," Aaliyah explained. "It's about learning business skills, building confidence, and feeling like we have a stake in our community's future." As Aaliyah spoke, Sarah found herself nodding along. The young woman's vision was inspiring, and Sarah couldn't help but see the potential benefits for the entire town. "I understand your passion, Aaliyah," Sarah said when the young woman finished, "and I can see the value in what you're trying to do. But I need you to understand the challenges from my perspective. There are laws and regulations in place for reasons: public safety, fair competition, tax collection." Aaliyah leaned forward, her eyes bright with determination. "I get that, Chief. We're not asking for a free pass. We're asking for support, for guidance. Maybe there's a way to create a program that helps young entrepreneurs navigate those regulations, instead of just shutting us down." Sarah considered this. "That's actually not a bad idea. A mentorship program, perhaps, with local business owners and maybe even some of my officers involved?" As they continued to brainstorm, Sarah felt a growing excitement. This was what community policing should be about, working together to find solutions, not just enforcing rules blindly. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus, Aaliyah's father. He looked surprised to see Sarah there, but listened intently as Aaliyah excitedly shared their discussion. "It sounds like you've had quite the morning," Marcus said when Aaliyah finished. He turned to Sarah, his expression serious but not unkind. "Chief Jenkins, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my daughter, but I have to ask, what happens next? We've seen promises of change before, only to have them fizzle out." Sarah met Marcus's gaze steadily. "Mr. Thompson, I can't promise overnight changes, but I can commit to being a vocal advocate for these young entrepreneurs within the department and with the town council. It won't be easy and there will be resistance, but I believe this could be a positive change for our community." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's a start, Chief, but we'll be watching closely to ensure these aren't just empty words." As Sarah prepared to leave, she felt a mix of emotions: hope, anxiety, determination. She knew that the path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, she felt truly excited about her role in shaping the community's future. "Aaliyah," Sarah said as she reached the door, "I'd like you to come speak at our next community outreach meeting. Share your vision with my officers. Help them understand what you're trying to achieve." Aaliyah's face lit up. "Really? I'd be honored, Chief." As Sarah drove to the station, her mind was already racing with plans. She would need to speak with the mayor, prepare her officers, reach out to local business owners. It would be an uphill battle, but looking back at the Thompson house in her rearview mirror, she knew it was a fight worth having. The day ahead would be long and likely contentious, but Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just enforcing the law anymore, she was working to shape it, to make it serve her community better. As she pulled into the station parking lot, Sarah took a deep breath, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in her quest for meaningful change. Sarah's newfound resolve was immediately put to the test as she entered the police station. The atmosphere was tense, with hushed conversation stopping abruptly as she walked by. She could feel the eyes of her officers on her, a mix of curiosity and concern evident in their gazes. As she reached her office, Sarah was confronted by her second-in-command, Lieutenant Davis. His face was set in a grim expression as he closed the door behind him. "Chief, we need to talk," Davis said, his voice low and urgent. "The rank and file are getting restless. There's talk about you going soft on these young troublemakers." Sarah felt a flare of irritation at the term troublemakers, but kept her voice calm. "They're not troublemakers, Davis. They're young entrepreneurs trying to make a difference in their community." Davis scoffed. "Entrepreneurs? Chief, they're breaking city ordinances left and right. Our job is to enforce the law, not bend it for every kid with a sob story." "Our job," Sarah countered, her voice firm, "is to serve and protect our community. Sometimes that means looking beyond the letter of the law to its spirit." The lieutenant shook his head. "This isn't like you, Sarah. These kids are manipulating you, and it's making us look weak." Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock at the door. It was Officer Rodriguez, looking uncomfortable. "Chief, sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation downtown. A group of protesters is gathering outside the community center. They're demanding to speak with you about the young vendor situation." Sarah nodded, grabbing her hat. "I'll handle it. Davis will continue this discussion later." As Sarah arrived at the community center, she was met with a cacophony of voices. A crowd had gathered, holding signs with slogans like "Support young entrepreneurs" and "Reform outdated laws." On the opposite side of the street, a smaller group of counter-protesters had assembled, calling for stricter enforcement of city ordinances. In the center of it all stood Aaliyah, megaphone in hand, leading the crowd in a chant for change. When she spotted Sarah, she approached, her expression a mix of determination and hope. "Chief Jenkins," Aaliyah called out, her voice carrying over the noise of the crowd. "We're glad you're here. We demand answers." Will you support our right to pursue our dreams, or will you continue to criminalize our efforts?" The crowd fell silent, all eyes on Sarah. She could feel the weight of the moment, knowing her response could either escalate the situation or pave the way for dialogue. "Aaliyah," Sarah began, her voice steady, "I hear your concerns. I understand your frustration, but change doesn't happen overnight, and it certainly doesn't happen through confrontation alone." A murmur ran through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in disappointment. "We've tried dialogue," Aaliyah countered. "We've been patient, but every day that passes is another day our dreams are put on hold. We need action, not just words." As the back and forth continued, Sarah noticed Marcus Thompson making his way through the crowd. He approached Sarah, his expression serious. "Chief Jenkins," Marcus said, his voice low but intense, "this is the moment where you need to decide which side of history you want to be on. Will you be remembered as the one who stifled young ambition, or the one who fostered a new generation of leaders?" Sarah felt the pressure mounting. The eyes of the community were upon her, waiting for her response. She knew that whatever she said next would have far-reaching consequences, not just for her career, but for the future of the town she had sworn to protect. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped forward, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "I stand here today not just as your chief of police, but as a member of this community. I've heard your voices, and I recognize that change is needed. But change must come through cooperation, not confrontation." She paused, looking directly at Aaliyah and Marcus. "I'm committed to working with you, with the city council and with local business leaders to find a solution that supports our young entrepreneurs while also addressing valid concerns about public safety and fair competition." The crowd's reaction was mixed, with some cheering and others expressing skepticism. As Sarah continued to outline her vision for a collaborative approach to change, she could see the doubt in some faces begin to give way to cautious hope. As the impromptu meeting broke up, Sarah found herself face-to-face with Marcus once again. "It's a start, Chief," he said, his tone measured. "But remember, actions speak louder than words. We'll be watching closely to ensure these promises translate into real change." Sarah nodded, fully aware of the challenging path ahead. As she walked back to her cruiser, she knew that the real work was just beginning. The confrontation had been navigated, but the true test would be in the days and weeks to come, as she worked to turn her words into concrete actions. In the weeks following the confrontation at the community center, Sarah found herself on a journey of personal growth and professional transformation. The experience of engaging with Aaliyah and the young entrepreneurs had opened her eyes to a new perspective on community policing, and she was determined to turn her promises into action. Sarah's first step was to immerse herself in the world of the young entrepreneurs she had once viewed with suspicion. She began by shadowing Aaliyah for a day, watching as the young woman navigated the challenges of running her small business. As they walked through the town, Sarah observed Aaliyah's interactions with customers, her meticulous record-keeping, and her innovative marketing strategies. She was struck by the young woman's professionalism and dedication. "You know, Aaliyah," Sarah admitted as they took a break for lunch, "I have to say I'm impressed. You've clearly put a lot of thought and effort into this." Aaliyah beamed with pride. "Thank you, Chief. It means a lot to hear you say that. This isn't just a hobby for me, it's my future." The day's experience left a lasting impression on Sarah. She realized that these young entrepreneurs weren't just selling products. They were developing crucial life skills and contributing to the local economy in meaningful ways. Inspired by what she had seen, Sarah began to reach out to other community leaders. She organized meetings with local business owners, city council members, and education officials to discuss ways to support and nurture young entrepreneurship. One evening, as Sarah sat in her office reviewing proposals for a youth business mentorship program, there was a knock at her door. It was Lieutenant Davis, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "Chief, got a minute?" he asked, stepping inside. Sarah nodded, gesturing for him to take a seat. What's on your mind, Davis? The lieutenant shifted in his chair. I've been watching what you've been doing with these young entrepreneurs. At first I thought you'd lost your mind, but... I'm starting to see what you're getting at. Sarah raised an eyebrow, surprised by this admission. Davis continued. Yesterday I was on patrol and I saw a kid selling homemade dog treats. My first instinct was to shut him down, but then I remembered what you said about looking beyond the letter of the law, so I talked to him instead. Turns out he's saving up to buy his sick dog some expensive medication. I ended up buying a bag of treats. Sarah smiled, feeling a sense of pride in her officer's growth. That's exactly the kind of community engagement we need, Davis. Thank you for sharing that. As word spread about the police department's new approach, Sarah noticed a shift in the community's attitude. The tension that had long existed between law enforcement and certain segments of the population began to ease. Young people in particular seemed more willing to engage with officers, seeing them as potential allies rather than adversaries. This change was put to the test during a community event organized by Aliyah and her fellow young entrepreneurs. The Youth Innovation Fair showcased the businesses and ideas of local young people, with police officers attending not as enforcers, but as mentors and supporters. Sarah walked through the bustling fair, her heart swelling with pride as she saw her officers engaging enthusiastically with the young exhibitors. Officer Rodriguez was deep in conversation with a teenager about his coding project, while Lieutenant Davis was sampling artisanal chocolates made by a young pastry chef. As she reached the center of the fair, Sarah found Aliyah surrounded by a group of admiring younger children. The young woman was explaining the basics of business planning, her eyes alight with passion. "Chief Jenkins," Aliyah called out when she spotted Sarah. "What do you think of the fair?" Sarah looked around, taking in the energy and excitement that filled the air. "It's incredible, Aliyah. You and your friends have done an amazing job. This is exactly the kind of positive community engagement we need." Aliyah beamed, then lowered her voice. "You know, a lot of this wouldn't have been possible without your support. Thank you for being willing to change and grow. It's made a real difference." As Sarah continued her tour of the fair, she reflected on her journey over the past few weeks. She had come a long way from the rigid, by-the-book chief she once was. By opening herself up to new ideas and perspectives, she had not only grown as a person, but had also helped foster positive change in her community. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but Sarah felt better equipped than ever to face them. She had learned that true leadership wasn't about maintaining the status quo, but about having the courage to evolve and adapt for the betterment of all. As she watched the young entrepreneurs interact with her officers, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for her town, one filled with promise and possibility. The success of the Youth Innovation Fair had sparked a wave of enthusiasm throughout the town. Riding this momentum, Aliyah and her fellow young entrepreneurs, with Sarah's support, proposed a larger event, a town-wide manifestation to showcase the positive impact of youth entrepreneurship and to advocate for more supportive policies. As the day of the event approached, Sarah found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. She had committed to not just allowing the manifestation, but actively participating in it. This decision had raised eyebrows among some of her superiors and colleagues, but Sarah stood firm in her conviction. The morning of the manifestation dawned bright and clear. Sarah stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her uniform. For a moment she hesitated, then made a bold decision. She removed her badge and gun, placing them carefully in their lockbox. Today she would join the community not as an enforcer of the law, but as a supporter of progress. As Sarah arrived at the town square, she was struck by the scale of the event. Thousands of people had gathered, far exceeding initial expectations. Colorful banners and signs filled the air, and the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Aliyah spotted Sarah and rushed over, her face flushed with excitement. "Chief Jenkins, can you believe this turnout? It's amazing." Sarah nodded, taking in the scene. "It's incredible, Aliyah. You should be proud of what you've accomplished." As they spoke, a hush fell over the crowd. It was time for the speeches to begin. Various community leaders took turns addressing the gathering, each emphasizing the importance of supporting young entrepreneurs and fostering innovation. Finally, it was Aaliyah's turn to speak. As she approached the podium, Sarah felt a surge of pride. The young woman she had once arrested was now standing tall, ready to address thousands. Aaliyah's speech was passionate and articulate. She spoke of the challenges faced by young entrepreneurs, the need for more supportive policies, and the potential for youth-led businesses to revitalize the local economy. The crowd hung on her every word, erupting into cheers at key moments. As Aaliyah concluded her speech, she surprised everyone with an unexpected announcement. "And now," she said, her voice ringing out clearly, "I'd like to invite Chief Sarah Jenkins to say a few words." A murmur ran through the crowd as Sarah made her way to the podium. This was not part of the planned program, and she could feel the weight of expectation as she faced the sea of faces. Taking a deep breath, Sarah began to speak. "A few months ago, I stood on the other side of a line drawn between law enforcement and the young entrepreneurs of this town. I was focused on enforcing rules without considering their impact. But thanks to the courage and persistence of young people like Aaliyah, I've learned to see things differently." She paused, looking out at the crowd. "Today I stand here not just as your chief of police, but as a proud supporter of the youth entrepreneurship movement. I commit to working tirelessly to change outdated policies and to foster an environment where innovation and entrepreneurship can thrive." The crowd erupted into cheers, with many rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Sarah could see tears in Aaliyah's eyes as she applauded from the side of the stage. As the speeches concluded, the manifestation transformed into a vibrant street festival. Young entrepreneurs showcased their products and services, local bands performed, and community members engaged in lively discussions about the future of their town. Sarah walked through the festival, chatting with attendees and admiring the various booths. She couldn't help but notice the positive interactions between her officers and the community members, a stark contrast to the tension that had existed just a few months ago. As the day wore on, Sarah found herself standing next to Marcus Thompson, Aaliyah's father. They watched in comfortable silence as Aaliyah excitedly explained her business model to a group of interested investors. "You know, Chief," Marcus said quietly, "when you first arrested Aaliyah, I never would have imagined we'd end up here. You've come a long way." Sarah nodded, feeling a mix of emotions. "We all have, Mr. Thompson. Your daughter has taught me more about community and justice than any police academy ever could." As the sun began to set on the successful manifestation, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that there would still be challenges ahead, but looking at the diverse, energized crowd around her, she was confident that together, they could build a more inclusive and prosperous community for all. As the manifestation reached its peak, with thousands of people celebrating in the streets, an unexpected tension began to simmer beneath the surface. Sarah, who had been basking in the positive energy of the event, suddenly felt a shift in the atmosphere. Her years of experience in law enforcement had honed her instincts, and something didn't feel right. Sarah scanned the crowd, her eyes narrowing as she spotted a group of men moving purposefully through the throng. They seemed out of place, their expressions hard and focused amidst the sea of joyful faces. As she watched, one of the men subtly passed something to a younger participant, something that looked suspiciously like a Molotov cocktail. Alarm bells rang in Sarah's head. She quickly made her way through the crowd, trying to keep the suspicious group in sight. As she moved, she noticed more pockets of tension forming, with arguments breaking out and pushing matches starting. Suddenly, a loud crash followed by screams erupted from the far end of the square. Sarah's heart sank as she saw flames beginning to lick up the side of a vendor's stall. Panic began to spread through the crowd. In the chaos that ensued, Sarah caught sight of a familiar face, Officer Jake Simmons, a recent transfer to her department. To her shock, she saw him handing out small objects to some of the more aggressive individuals in the crowd. With a sinking feeling, she realized what was happening. This was an orchestrated attempt to discredit the movement. Sarah's mind raced. She needed to act fast to prevent the situation from escalating further and to expose the true instigators. She quickly radioed for backup, then made her way towards Officer Simmons. "Jake!" she called out, her voice cutting through the noise. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Simmons turned, surprise and then defiance flashing across his face. "What needs to be done, Chief? These punks need to learn their place. We're just helping them along." Sarah's anger flared. "By inciting a riot? You're a police officer, for God's sake. You're supposed to protect people, not endanger them." As she confronted Simmons, Sarah noticed Aaliyah pushing through the crowd towards them, concern etched on her face. "Chief Jenkins, what's going on?" Aaliyah called out. In that moment, Sarah made a split-second decision. She turned to Aaliyah, her voice urgent. "Aaliyah, I need your help. This isn't a spontaneous riot. It's being instigated. We need to calm the crowd and expose the real troublemakers." Aaliyah's eyes widened, but she nodded firmly. "What do you need me to do?" "Get to the stage," Sarah instructed. "Use the PA system. Tell everyone what's really happening. I'll handle things here." As Aaliyah rushed off, Sarah turned back to Simmons, who was now trying to slip away. "Not so fast, officer," she said, her voice steely. "You're under arrest for inciting a riot and endangering public safety." Simmons sneered. "You've gone soft, Chief. You're siding with these lawbreakers over your own officers." "No," Sarah retorted. "I'm siding with justice and community over bigotry and abuse of power. Now put your hands behind your back." As Sarah cuffed Simmons, she heard Aaliyah's voice booming over the PA system. "Everyone, please listen. This violence is not us. It's being instigated by those who want to discredit our movement. Stay calm, help each other, and don't let them win." The effect was almost immediate. The crowd began to settle, with people looking around in confusion, and then determination. Sarah saw groups start to form, protecting the vendor stalls and helping to put out the small fires that had started. Over the next hour, Sarah and her loyal officers worked to round up the instigators, many of whom turned out to be from out of town. The young entrepreneurs and their supporters helped maintain order, proving that their commitment to peaceful change was stronger than any attempt to derail it. As the situation calmed, Sarah found herself standing with Aaliyah and Marcus, surveying the scene. Despite the chaos, the spirit of the event had survived. If anything, the community seemed more united than ever. "You know," Marcus said, a note of admiration in his voice, "I never thought I'd see the day when a police chief would stand with us against corrupt officers. You've proved me wrong, Sarah." Sarah nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and pride. This is what real community policing looks like. It's not us versus them. It's all of us working together for a better future. As the sun set on a day that had brought both celebration and challenge, Sarah knew that this was a turning point. The plot to discredit the movement had backfired, instead cementing the bonds between law enforcement and the community. There would be hard work ahead, rooting out corruption in her department, building new policies to support young entrepreneurs. But looking at Aaliyah's determined face, Sarah felt confident that they were on the right path. The manifestation had become more than just a demonstration. It had become a testament to the power of understanding, growth, and unity in the face of adversity.